The morning I got that email, I was debugging code at 6:47 a.m. with my third cup of coffee, completely unaware that my 12-year career was about to be deleted with a single click. Madison Sterling, the new CEO's 26-year-old daughter, had just fired me via a 2-line message that read like a template she'd copied from a business school textbook. She had no idea that every transaction, every payment, every digital heartbeat of their billion-dollar empire ran through systems I had built from scratch. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I started at TechFlow Solutions when it was still operating out of a converted warehouse with mismatched furniture and dreams bigger than our bank account. Back then, the company processed maybe 1,000 transactions a day, through a patchwork of third-party systems that crashed more often than they worked. I was fresh out of college, armed with a computer science degree and the kind of naive confidence that makes you volunteer for impossible projects. When the CEO, Robert Sterling, asked if anyone could build a custom payment processing system that could scale with our growth, I raised my hand before anyone else could blink. Those early days were a blur of 18-hour coding sessions, energy drinks, and the intoxicating rush of creating something from nothing. I lived and breathed in algorithms, spending nights in the office because the code was flowing, and I couldn't bear to interrupt the momentum. Every function I wrote, every database I optimized, every security protocol I implemented, became part of something larger than myself. The payment system wasn't just software to me. It was architecture, it was poetry written in Python and JavaScript, it was the invisible foundation that would support everything we were building. As TechFlow grew from a scrappy startup to a major player in the fintech space, my system grew with it. What started as a simple payment processor evolved into a sophisticated ecosystem that handled everything from microtransactions to million-dollar enterprise deals. I built redundancies upon redundancies, created fail-safes for the fail-safes, and developed proprietary algorithms that could detect fraud patterns 3 steps ahead of the criminals trying to exploit them. The system wasn't just robust, it was elegant, efficient, and absolutely irreplaceable. The early team knew my value. Robert Sterling himself would often joke during company meetings that Sarah was the person keeping the lights on, literally and figuratively. When new hires joined, they were told that if they wanted to understand how money moved through the company, they needed to talk to me. I wasn't just the head of payment systems. I was the institutional memory, the guardian of processes that had been refined through years of trial and error, success and near disaster. But success has a way of changing organizations, and TechFlow was no exception. As we went public and the board grew more sophisticated, Robert began talking about bringing in fresh leadership to take us to the next level. He was approaching 60, and the demands of running a billion-dollar company were taking their toll. The writing was on the wall, but I never imagined the transition would be so brutal, so personally devastating. Madison Sterling arrived like a hurricane in designer heels. She had an MBA from Wharton, 2 years of consulting experience at McKinsey, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having failed at anything significant. Her father introduced her as the future of the company, someone who could bring modern management practices and strategic thinking to our scrappy entrepreneurial culture. She spoke in buzzwords about digital transformation, operational efficiency, and right-sizing the organization, as if she were the first person to discover these concepts. From the moment she walked into our headquarters, I could sense the shift in the air. Madison moved through the office like she was conducting an audit, taking notes on everything from our open-plan workspace to the vintage arcade games in the break room. She scheduled one-on-one meetings with every department head, armed with questions that felt more like interrogations than conversations. When my turn came, she spent exactly 17 minutes asking about my role, my team size, and whether I thought our payment processing could be more efficiently handled by existing third-party solutions. The question hit me like a physical blow. More efficiently handled by third-party solutions? I had spent over a decade building something unique, something that gave us competitive advantages our rivals could only dream of. Our system processed payments faster than industry standards, with fraud detection rates that insurance companies used as benchmarks, and uptime statistics that made our enterprise clients choose us over larger competitors. The idea that this could all be replaced by some off-the-shelf solution showed a fundamental misunderstanding of what we had built. I tried to explain the intricacies, the competitive advantages, the cost savings we achieved by keeping everything in-house. Madison nodded politely and took notes, but I could see in her eyes that she had already made up her mind. To her, I wasn't an innovator who had built the backbone of the company. I was an expensive legacy employee standing in the way of modernization. She saw redundancy where I saw expertise, inefficiency where I saw craftsmanship. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in corporate psychology. Madison began bringing in consultants from her former firm, expensive suits who spoke in the same buzzwords and carried themselves with the same unearned confidence. They conducted meetings about optimization and streamlining, always with the implicit suggestion that the current way of doing things was outdated. I watched as younger employees began parroting Madison's language, talking about synergies and best practices, as if these phrases contained some magical power. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Meanwhile, I continued doing what I had always done, keeping the systems running, solving problems before they became crises, and maintaining the infrastructure that processed hundreds of millions of dollars in transactions every month. But I could feel the ground shifting beneath my feet. Madison was building her own inner circle, promoting people who spoke her language, and shared her vision of a leaner, more efficient organization. The old guard, the people who had built TechFlow from the ground up, were increasingly marginalized in meetings and excluded from strategic discussions. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Madison talked about efficiency and modernization, I was the one actually implementing improvements to the system, optimizing performance, and preparing for the increased transaction volumes that our growing client base demanded. Every night I would push updates and patches, monitor system performance, and ensure that the digital machinery hummed along without interruption. But these contributions were invisible to someone who measured value in spreadsheets rather than uptime statistics. I started documenting everything, not out of paranoia but out of professional pride. Every system I had built, every process I had optimized, every piece of institutional knowledge that lived in my head but nowhere else in the company. If Madison was planning to replace me with third-party solutions, I wanted her to understand exactly what she would be giving up. The documentation grew into hundreds of pages covering everything from basic system architecture to advanced troubleshooting procedures that only I knew how to perform. The tension in the office became palpable. Employees began choosing sides, some embracing Madison's vision of corporate efficiency, while others quietly expressed loyalty to the people who had built the company. I found myself in an impossible position, trying to maintain professionalism while watching everything I had created being systematically devalued. Team meetings became exercises in translation, as Madison's consultants would present recommendations that ignored fundamental realities about our systems and our client relationships. Then came the reorganization announcement. Madison called an all-hands meeting to unveil her plan for streamlining operations and eliminating redundancies. She spoke with practiced authority about right-sizing the organization and focusing on core competencies. Department by department, she outlined changes that would transform TechFlow from the scrappy, innovative company it had been into something that looked more like the consulting firms she admired. When she reached the technology division, my division, I held my breath. The payment processing team, she announced, would be dramatically reduced as we transitioned to industry-standard third-party solutions. This would eliminate unnecessary complexity and reduce operational overhead, while allowing us to focus on our core business of client relationships and strategic growth. She spoke about these changes as if they were obviously beneficial, as if the systems that had powered our success for over a decade were merely obstacles to overcome. I sat in that conference room, surrounded by colleagues who avoided eye contact, listening to my life's work being dismissed as unnecessary complexity. The system that processed every transaction, that kept our clients' money secure, that gave us competitive advantages worth millions of dollars in retained business, was being relegated to operational overhead. Madison's vision of efficiency was about to collide with the reality of what it actually took to run a billion-dollar fintech company. After the meeting, I approached Madison directly. I asked for a private conversation, hoping to convey what the consultants' reports couldn't capture about the true value of our homegrown systems. She agreed to meet, But when I walked into her office the next morning, I could tell from her body language that this was a formality rather than a genuine discussion. She had already made her decisions, and my role in her vision of TechFlow was clear. I didn't have one. That evening, as I sat in my apartment staring at lines of code on my laptop screen, I realized that everything I had built was about to be dismantled by someone who had never written a single line of production code. Madison Sterling was about to learn a lesson that no MBA program teaches: the difference between managing a business and understanding the technology that makes it possible. She was about to discover that some things that look like costs on a spreadsheet are actually the invisible pillars holding up the entire enterprise. The email arrived at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the clinical efficiency of someone who had never had to fire anyone before. 2 lines of corporate speak that reduced 12 years of innovation, dedication, and irreplaceable expertise to a cost-cutting measure. Madison Sterling thought she was eliminating redundancy. What she had actually done was set in motion the collapse of everything her father had built, and she wouldn't realize it until the first transaction failed to process, and the money stopped flowing. As I read those 2 lines again, a strange calm settled over me. Madison had just made the biggest mistake in TechFlow's corporate history, and she had no idea what was coming. The system she was so eager to replace wasn't just code. It was the circulatory system of a billion-dollar company. And in about 72 hours, when the third-party solutions failed to handle our transaction volume and client requirements, she was going to learn exactly why some people are irreplaceable. I closed my laptop, poured another cup of coffee, and began planning for the phone call I knew would come. Because when you fire the person who built the foundation of your digital empire, you better hope they documented everything. And even then, you better hope they're willing to come back and fix what you're about to break. The first sign that something was wrong came exactly 73 hours after my termination email, at 3:22 a.m. on a Friday morning. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jake Morrison, one of the junior developers who had worked under me for 3 years. The message was simple but loaded with panic. "Sarah, the payment gateway is throwing errors. Madison's team can't figure it out. Transactions are failing. What do we do?" I stared at the glowing screen in the darkness of my bedroom, feeling a mixture of vindication and genuine concern. This wasn't about being right or proving a point. This was about hundreds of thousands of customers who trusted TechFlow with their financial transactions. But Madison Sterling had made her choice, and the consequences were now cascading through the system like a virus spreading through a network. The irony was almost poetic. Madison had spent weeks talking about efficiency and modernization, but she had never bothered to understand the fundamental architecture that made efficiency possible. The third-party payment processors she had chosen were industry standard, which meant they were designed for average companies with average needs. TechFlow wasn't average. Our transaction volumes, our client requirements, our security protocols, and our integration points were all custom-built for a reason. By 6 a.m., my phone was buzzing constantly. Text messages from developers, missed calls from operations managers, and increasingly frantic voicemails from people who had watched me get fired but were now desperate for my help. I listened to each message with the calm detachment of someone watching a predictable disaster unfold. The third-party system couldn't handle our peak transaction loads. The fraud detection protocols were triggering false positives on legitimate enterprise clients. The custom reporting features that our biggest customers relied on simply didn't exist in the off-the-shelf solution. What Madison didn't understand was that our payment system wasn't just about processing transactions. Over the years, I had built integrations with dozens of enterprise clients who required custom data formatting, specialized security protocols, and real-time reporting capabilities that were unique to their business models. These weren't nice-to-have features. They were contractual obligations worth millions of dollars in annual revenue. When the new system failed to deliver these capabilities, it wasn't just a technical problem, it was a breach of contract. The most devastating failure was with Meridian Financial, our largest enterprise client, who processed over $50 million in transactions through our platform every month. They required real-time fraud scoring with custom algorithms that I had developed specifically for their risk profile. The third-party system offered fraud detection, but it was generic, designed for retail transactions rather than the complex institutional transfers that Meridian handled. When their first batch of morning transactions was flagged as suspicious and automatically blocked, their CFO was on the phone with Robert Sterling within minutes. I learned about the Meridian situation from my former colleague Lisa Chen, who had been promoted to interim head of client relations after Madison's reorganization. Lisa called me directly, her voice tight with stress and barely controlled panic. "Sarah, we're in crisis mode. Meridian is threatening to pull their entire account if we can't resolve the transaction blocking by end of business today. Madison's consultants are saying it's just a configuration issue, but nobody knows how to fix it." The situation was worse than I had imagined. Madison's team had not just replaced my system, they had dismantled it completely, assuming that the third-party solution would seamlessly take over all functionality. They had no backup plan, no parallel systems, and no documentation of the custom configurations that had taken years to perfect. It was like demolishing a house and expecting a prefabricated structure to somehow occupy the same space without any foundation work. As the day progressed, the crisis deepened. The customer service department was overwhelmed with complaints about failed transactions, delayed payments, and frozen accounts. Social media began lighting up with frustrated customers, sharing screenshots of error messages and failed payment attempts. The TechFlow brand, which had been built on reliability and trust, was suddenly associated with system failures and customer frustration. Madison, to her credit, was working frantically to resolve the situation. But her approach revealed the fundamental gap between theoretical knowledge and practical experience. She brought in more consultants, scheduled emergency meetings with the third-party vendor, and demanded hourly progress reports from her technical team. What she didn't do was acknowledge that the problem might be more complex than a simple configuration adjustment. The breakthrough moment came when Jake Morrison, acting on his own initiative, managed to access some of the backup documentation I had created before my departure. Hidden in the technical specifications, he found references to the custom algorithms and integration protocols that were critical for clients like Meridian. When he brought this information to Madison's attention, the magnitude of what had been lost began to dawn on her. That evening, Robert Sterling called me directly. His voice carried a weight I had never heard before, the sound of a man watching his life's work crumble in real time. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Can this situation be fixed without your involvement?" The question hung in the air like a confession. Robert Sterling, the visionary CEO who had built TechFlow from nothing, was admitting that his daughter's modernization plan had been a catastrophic mistake. I took a deep breath before answering, choosing my words carefully. "Robert, the technical issues can eventually be resolved, but it will take months and cost millions. More importantly, you're going to lose clients who can't afford to wait for eventually. Meridian won't be the only one. Every enterprise client with custom requirements is going to evaluate their options, and some of them won't stick around to see if you can rebuild what you just tore down." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Robert understood business in a way that Madison didn't yet grasp. He knew that client relationships, once broken, were often impossible to repair. He knew that TechFlow's reputation for reliability was worth more than the cost savings Madison had projected from her efficiency initiatives. Most importantly, he knew that some mistakes have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate crisis. Over the weekend, the situation deteriorated further. 2 more enterprise clients submitted formal notices of contract review, citing system reliability concerns. The third-party payment processor, overwhelmed by the sudden volume and complexity of TechFlow's requirements, began implementing transaction limits that further disrupted service. Madison's team was working around the clock, but they were essentially trying to rebuild a custom airplane while it was falling from the sky. The most painful moment came when I received a call from David Park, one of the senior developers who had been part of my original team. David had stayed with the company through the transition, hoping to help bridge the gap between the old system and the new one. But after 3 days of crisis management, he was ready to quit. "Sarah, I can't watch this anymore. Everything we built, everything we were proud of, it's being destroyed by people who don't understand what they're dealing with. I'm putting in my resignation tomorrow." David's words hit me harder than my own termination had. He represented the institutional knowledge and technical expertise that TechFlow would need to survive this crisis. If people like David left, the company wouldn't just lose their current capabilities, they would lose the possibility of ever rebuilding them. Madison's efficiency initiative was creating a brain drain that would cripple the company's technical foundation for years to come. Monday morning brought a moment of clarity that changed everything. I was reviewing some freelance opportunities when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was professional but urgent. "Ms. Martinez, this is Janet Wilson from Meridian Financial's legal department. We understand you were the primary architect of TechFlow's payment systems. We're prepared to offer you a substantial consulting contract to help resolve the current technical issues, regardless of your employment status with TechFlow." The offer was stunning, both in its financial terms and its implications. Meridian wasn't just trying to fix their immediate problem. They were essentially bypassing TechFlow's management to work directly with me. It was a vote of no confidence in Madison's ability to resolve the crisis, and a validation of the specialized knowledge I had developed over 12 years. More importantly, it was proof that my expertise had value that extended beyond TechFlow's organizational chart. I politely declined Meridian's offer, but the conversation gave me a new perspective on the situation. Madison had fired me because she saw me as redundant, as an expensive legacy employee whose knowledge could be easily replaced by modern solutions and fresh thinking. What she hadn't considered was that knowledge itself could become a competitive advantage, and that expertise developed over years of hands-on experience couldn't be replicated by consultants or third-party vendors. Tuesday brought the call I had been expecting since Friday morning. Madison Sterling's voice was different this time, smaller, less certain, stripped of the confident authority she had projected during her first months at TechFlow. "Sarah, I need to speak with you. Can we meet today?" There was no corporate buzzword, no strategic framing, just a simple human request from someone who had reached the limits of her theoretical knowledge. We met at a coffee shop near the TechFlow headquarters, neutral territory where we could speak honestly without the weight of corporate politics. Madison looked exhausted, her usual polished appearance replaced by the rumpled urgency of someone who had been working 18-hour days without results. When she spoke, her voice carried a vulnerability I had never heard before. "I made a mistake," she said simply. "I thought I understood the business, but I didn't understand the technology. I thought efficiency meant simplification, but I didn't realize that complexity could be a strength rather than a weakness. I fired you because I saw you as resistance to change, but what I was really seeing was expertise that I didn't recognize." The admission was remarkable, not just for its honesty, but for what it revealed about Madison's capacity for growth. Many people in her position would have doubled down on their original decisions, blaming external factors or subordinate execution rather than acknowledging fundamental errors in judgment. Madison's willingness to admit her mistakes suggested that she might actually be capable of learning from this crisis. "The question now," I said carefully, "is what you want to do about it. Because this isn't just about fixing the immediate technical problems. This is about rebuilding trust with clients, with employees, and with the market. That's going to require more than just restoring the old systems. It's going to require a completely different approach to how you think about technology and the people who create it." Madison nodded, and I could see her processing the implications of what I was saying. She had come into TechFlow with a mandate to modernize and optimize, but the crisis had taught her that not everything that looks outdated is actually obsolete. Sometimes what appears to be inefficiency is actually resilience, and what looks like redundancy is actually irreplaceable expertise. Our conversation lasted for 2 hours, covering everything from immediate technical solutions to long-term strategic planning. Madison asked detailed questions about the custom algorithms, the enterprise integrations, and the security protocols that made TechFlow's systems unique. For the first time since her arrival, she was listening to learn rather than listening to evaluate and optimize. As we prepared to leave, Madison made an offer that surprised me with its scope and sincerity. "Sarah, I want you to come back, but not just to fix what we broke. I want you to help me build something better. I want to combine the innovation and efficiency I believe in with the expertise and institutional knowledge that I now understand we can't afford to lose. Will you consider it? The offer was tempting, both financially and professionally, but more than that, it represented an opportunity to prove that technology and business strategy didn't have to be opposing forces. Madison's crisis had created space for a different kind of conversation about how companies could embrace change without destroying the foundations that made change possible. As I drove home that evening, I thought about all the people whose livelihoods depended on TechFlow's success. The developers who took pride in building elegant solutions, the client managers who had spent years cultivating relationships, the customers who trusted the platform with their financial transactions. Madison's mistake had put all of that at risk, but her willingness to learn from that mistake created an opportunity for something unprecedented, a true partnership between visionary leadership and technical expertise. The next morning, I made my decision. I called Madison and accepted her offer, but with conditions that would ensure this kind of crisis could never happen again. We would build systems that were both innovative and resilient, processes that embraced change while preserving essential knowledge, and a culture that valued expertise regardless of how traditional or modern it appeared. TechFlow's crisis had lasted exactly 1 week, but its impact would reshape the company for years to come. Madison Sterling had learned that true leadership meant recognizing expertise wherever it existed, even when it didn't fit her preconceptions. And I had learned that sometimes the most powerful response to being undervalued isn't revenge or vindication. It's the opportunity to build something better than what existed before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.